So what if sexual pleasure wasn't just a biological function? The writer Zhu Fang has this really unique idea, a theology of orgasm. It's a concept that kind of challenges everything we think we know from both science and religion, suggesting this incredible feeling might be something, well, something far more profound.
And the whole argument really kicks off with a simple but pretty powerful question. At that absolute peak of sexual pleasure, what is that feeling? And where on earth does it come from?
To get a handle on this, let's just look at how people actually describe it. This first one is simple, but it says a lot. It feels like being in heaven. But it's not always this serene, blissful thing. For some people, it's like this all-consuming force of nature, right? A raging flame that just completely takes over everything. And this really gets to the heart of the idea. The feeling is described as being transcendent, an ecstasy so intense it feels almost superhuman. So what are we supposed to make of a feeling this powerful? Zhu Fang's argument really builds this case that what we're talking about here isn't just some boring biological function. It's framed as something genuinely special, something that seems to defy any simple explanation. And what's really interesting is that this idea gets a little backup from a scientific perspective. UCLA physiology professor Jared Diamond actually describes human sexuality as magical and beyond nature. I mean, when a scientist starts using language like that, you know we're dealing with something pretty extraordinary. Okay, so if this feeling is so exceptional, we have to ask the obvious biological question, right? Is it all just for making babies? This whole perspective really challenges that conventional wisdom. And here is the huge counterargument. The usual explanation is that all this pleasure exists to encourage us to procreate. But if the only goal is to pass on your genes, is this really the best way to do it? This whole complicated, energy-intensive process. To back this up, the argument brings in researcher R. Stephen Howard, and he points out that, look, from a purely energy standpoint, asexual reproduction is way more efficient. It's a direct, cheap way to make copies, which kind of implies that sexual reproduction has to be about more than just efficiency. And this is the question that cracks the door wide open to the core theological argument. If nature could have picked a simpler, easier path for reproduction, why did it choose this incredibly complex and intensely pleasurable one? What's the real purpose? Well, Zhu Fang's answer is that pleasure isn't just the means to an end, it is the end. The argument is that this feeling is a deliberate gift from what's called a greatest creator, and it's designed purely for the enjoyment of life. Procreation is just a really nice side benefit. Okay, but if you accept that idea, that this incredible pleasure is a divine gift, you immediately run smack into a major problem, a paradox that sits right at the heart of many of the world's great religions. And that leads to this huge contradiction. Why would a creator give humanity such a powerful, amazing gift, only for major religions to turn around and slap a bunch of strict rules on it, warning everyone about its dangers and temptations? I mean, the conflict is just so stark. On one side, you have this experience of pure ecstasy, and on the other, you have one of the most famous commandments in history: you shall not commit adultery. How can both of these things exist in the same universe? The author also points out that in Christianity, this prohibition goes even deeper. It's not just about the physical act. Jesus' teaching frames the very thought, the desire itself, as a transgression of the spirit. And this isn't just limited to one faith. The author brings up the Shurangama Sutra in Buddhism, which has a very similar warning, that sexual desire, if you don't overcome it, can lead you away from enlightenment and onto a so-called demonic path. So this paradox, it's pretty universal. So how does the author get out of this jam? How can pleasure be both a divine gift and a spiritual obstacle? Well, the solution proposed isn't to deny one or the other, but to completely reframe the entire journey. The perspective here uses this really clever analogy. For most of us, the religious ideal of complete abstinence is a massive leap. It's like telling a first grader they need to start working on their PhD thesis tomorrow. The gap is just way too big. Which, of course, leads to this question. If that all-or-nothing jump is just too much for most people, is there another way? A more gradual path that doesn't demand we immediately give up a fundamental part of being human? And the proposed model is this multi-stage journey. You start out in the worldly realm, that's primary school, where you experience all of life's gifts. Then you can progress to the 1,000-year world, which is like university, and eventually, maybe, to the highest spiritual plane, the Elysium world. It's a ladder, not a cliff you have to jump off. So, let's tie this all together. What's the final conclusion? How does this all boil down into a single, cohesive philosophy? So, the crucial takeaway is this. In this framework, sexual pleasure is not some sin you have to stamp out. Instead, it's a divine gift that you should experience with gratitude. It's part of that primary school phase of our existence, a stepping stone on a much longer spiritual journey, not a giant wall that you have to scale immediately. And this whole viewpoint leaves us with one last really provocative thought. It completely reframes the experience, not as a departure from the divine, but as a potential glimpse of it. It's a challenging question that asks all of us to reconsider where and how we find spiritual meaning.